Coming to introduce our next speaker is Mrs. Fiona Gardner, who serves as the chairperson for our Economics and Trade Division and several other divisions. So she has a lot of responsibility and a lot of hats that she is wearing. So please welcome Mrs. Fiona Gardner as she introduces our next speaker.
Good morning, everybody. I'll take this opportunity before I introduce our next speaker. Our governor mentioned our balance of payments and briefly touched on some trade-related issues. The Chamber is currently working with the Ministry of Financial Services, which has responsibility for international trade, to set up a trade information services portal. So we're actually seeking to create for you, the private sector, an electronic portal where you would be able to go and receive information about the Bahamas' trade statistics, other trade-related information, international trade agreements of which the Bahamas is a part, and how you might utilize those. On Monday, we're signing with the Ministry of Financial Services an MOU, which will govern this portal during the period that the Chamber will be administering it. And then in the weeks following, we will launch this. We're in the final stages of actually building it, and so it's almost ready to press send so that you can have access to it. So you can look out for that. Our next speaker, Jerry Butler, is the Executive Director at the Inter-American Development Bank with responsibility for Caribbean countries. This is actually the second time that Mr. Butler has served in this capacity, as he was previously elected to the post in 2004 through 2008. Many of you will actually be familiar with Mr. Butler because I'm not even sure if his consultancy still exists. It might still do so, but he was head of a Bahamas-based private consultancy practice providing legal, financial, corporate, and business advisory services. His firm specialized in identifying and executing Caribbean project investment opportunities in the public and private sectors. He also served as a senior consultant and advisor in the Office of the Prime Minister and to the Minister of Finance. I think that's multiple ministers of finance. Mr. Butler frequently provides strategic advisory services on policy and legislative initiatives throughout the Caribbean and Latin America. He is also the founding chairman of the Caribbean Renewable Energy Forum, the largest and oldest Caribbean event for renewable energy stakeholders. He served as chairman of the Latin American Caribbean Council on Renewable Energy Advisory Board and is a consultant on the World Bank Caribbean Entrepreneur SME program. He was the deputy chairman of the Bahamas Securities Commission at one point and director of a significant Caribbean insurance company. His professional experience in public accounting, wealth management, and financial services spans over 30 years and across multiple continents in New York, Europe, and the Caribbean. He holds an MBA from the University of Miami, a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from New York's Manhattan College, and studied law at the University of the West Indies. He is a New York State CPA, a licensed chartered accountant, building contractor, financial and corporate service provider, realtor, and is a certified IAAF coach in track and field sports. It's a wonder he gets an opportunity to do any work. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Butler to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. Vienna, thank you so much for your very kind remarks. And I have to say publicly, as an edict for my current assignment, my firm had to cease. But I come from a family, I think the only family in the Bahamas where there are 4 CPAs. So my brothers are currently handling my clients, and so I do not have a private firm. I have no conflict of interest. No, my name is not Donald Trump, and no, I'm perfectly all right. I'm perfectly independent of everything. I'm an independent member of the board of directors in Washington, D.C., where I'm currently resident. So thank you so much, Vienna, again, for your kind remarks. Let me also indicate my sincere thanks to Gowan, my very good friend. I'm ex-Price Waterhouse. I never thought I'd say this, Gowan. He's ex-Price Waterhouse. And also my close friend Edison, who was very kind enough at the last minute to ask me to come over and speak at this event. You all know that I'm a certified coach in track and field in the evenings. I used to pick up kids from public schools and coach them. And my wife went to QC. I went to St. Augustine's. And right now I have trepidations because QC is up with 400 and something points. SAC is only at 396, and it looks like they might take us again. So when I speak to my wife from Washington to see if she'll be laughing at me if QC wins. So there are a lot of competing events. So for you to take time out from your businesses and your social schedules to really come here and listen to persons who I really think are some of the very best intellects on the Bahamas economy really shows the commitment of the Chamber and the private sector to making this little piece of rock that we live on the best little piece of rock that we could give to our children and live on also. So I want to thank you all with a sincere amount of humility for taking time out to come here to listen to us. I also have to mention that one of the competing events that's happening today is the IDB in the Caribbean is launching an educational initiative at College of the Bahamas all day. That's all day, and when you leave here, I should give you a hint. We have free food at that event beginning 1 o'clock. So when this is over, if you have time and you pop down to COB, we have a plethora of international speakers, and basically we're focusing on something that in my presentation I'll talk about, which is the investment that is what I consider to be the most critical investment this country can make right now, and that is an investment in the future of our young people. So I would want to encourage you to also, if you can, attend that event, and of course go to watch our kids excel in sports at the track. I also want to give you one last caveat, and that is, unfortunately, I'm giving a speech on reinventing the Jamaican economy tonight at 7 in Washington. So when I finish here, I may not be able to stay back at the panel. If there are any questions I can field, I'll take them, but I have to get to the airport for a 1 o'clock flight to get back to Washington. But my email is Jerry B, that's Jerry B, at iadb.org. Any questions you feel to me, I will respond, and I will also copy that response to my dear friend Edison, who assures me that the Chamber will consolidate all of our remarks and our responses, and you'll be able to have access to them. So to the extent that I am not able to engage you because I have to hit and run, I really apologize in advance. I expect the presentations here will have a lot of quantitative data from, as we've experienced just now, from another dear friend, John Roll, who is running the central bank, and also with Simon coming, and then with Jarko speaking. I expect you will get what will be real numbers on the economy. So I'm going to try to stay away from most of the quantitative information. I had sent my presentation, but I know there was some trouble loading it, so we'll just scroll through. I have 4 easy slides. The first slide, I'm going to talk about the IDB. The second slide, I'm going to talk about what the IDB is and has been doing in the Bahamas, and give you some idea of where the thrust is of our work. The third slide, I'm going to talk about both opportunities and threats that I see and that the IDB sees in the Bahamian economy all at once. And then my last slide is just to give you some idea of what my personal vision is for where we're going and where I would want as a dreamer for us to be. So My first slide on the IDB should always begin with the preface that the views expressed here, those of my own, Jerry Butler, and do not necessarily represent the views of my other 13 colleague executive directors who have the responsibility of managing all policy and regulation for the Inter-American Development Bank system. So I am not binding the bank in my statements, nor am I binding any of the 48 countries that vote every 3 years to elect me to represent them. So these are my views, but to a very large extent, they're based on empirical data that we've gathered at the bank. So at the IDB, we change lives, and we've had that responsibility since 1959. The bank is the oldest and the largest of the regional development bank. We have over $100 billion in assets and the capital to back it. We have a robust, and it's a mandate of the 14 executive directors from the 48 governor owners of the bank that we must maintain a AAA rating. That increases our leverage capacity. Right now we borrow at less than LIBOR. And we have the ability to on-lend to a country like the Bahamas at tenors of more than 20 years. That's 20 to 30 years. And right now, our interest rate on sovereign deals is LIBOR plus 85 basis points. So our efficiency in managing the money that we take in at LIBOR and on-lending it is very much unparalleled. We also have a kind of side criticism, which is when we engage with a client government on a project or lending opportunity, our money usually comes with quite a bit of bells and whistles. And those bells and whistles requires the achievement of certain goals, the achievement of certain best practices, and also a kind of thrust where what we're trying to do is improve the socioeconomic development of the citizens who are the ultimate beneficiaries of our developmental funding. So sustainable growth at the environmental level, poverty reduction, and social equity is really the focus of everything that we do. The IDB is a SUSU, or an ASU. And the 48 countries, including the Bahamas, we buy into the bank and we pay into the bank very regularly, capital, and then that capital is pooled and it comes back out with resources that the bank has borrowed. So it has been a kind of incredible co-op that has worked for the benefit of all of the beneficiaries, both the 22 donor countries and the 26 borrowing member countries. Our thrust for the next 10 years is going to be in 5 sectors. And these 5 sectors, which is our overall thrust for Latin America and the Caribbean, are also very particularly intertwined with the opportunities that we will be engaging in the Bahamas. And I will say them quite quickly, but you'll get the message. It's social policy for equity and productivity. Equity and productivity is key to everything that we do with our resources when we engage a client government. It is very important that the gap, both the gender gap, that is women in particular, and their earnings potential, because if you improve the earnings potential of women, you improve the next generation of the people that they're responsible for nurturing. And also, if you improve the earnings gap of the poor and bring them up to the level of middle, you improve the ability to deal with efficiencies associated with some things like taking what I think I should be taking because I'm poor. You take crime out of the factor, because if everybody is on an even keel and gets to middle class, and if there's hope that if you're middle class, you might become wealthy or so, people tend to fall in line. But when you have large gaps of inequality, an underground level of poverty, and a high overground level of wealth, there is an equilibrium of a clash and social mores. And I think we all are experiencing that in this country from time to time. Infrastructure is really the driving force behind what makes a country tick. We know the road to development starts with the development of roads. So that's a big focus of the IDB. The infrastructural gap for LAC is anticipated at about 5% of overall LAC GDP, which is about $250 billion. So our lending program for this year of $13 billion is just a drop in the bucket if we can't leverage that with private sector initiatives to fill that gap. Competitiveness and the creations of sustainable institutions for social growth is another thrust. Protection of the environment, climate change, renewable energy, and very importantly, food security is our overall thrust for Latin America and the Caribbean, and very specific to the Bahamas in all of our negotiations. The IDB, in addition to lending money and in addition to giving money in technical assistance grants, and also in addition to doing private sector deals, is the source of a lot of empirical data that is very critical to any discussions. And when I listen to discussions in the Bahamas from time to time, I'm disappointed at the anecdotal, I feel way that we have our discussions, when in fact we have quite a bit of empirical studies to back up a lot of the particular problems that we face with. In other words, the Bahamas is certainly not unique with the problems it's facing, and we've studied these problems from country to country. And while every country has a peculiar set of circumstances, there is a prescriptive set of policies we can pursue that might solve some of our problems in the Bahamas without having to reinvent the wheel. Some of the quick publications that we have authorized this year: crime and the cost of crime. I think on average for LAC is about 3.5% of GDP. Output for the Bahamas is slightly higher, but basically the empirical methodology works on, how much does it cost to house a prisoner? What happens when we take a prisoner out of society in terms of lost productivity? What does it cost the victim? That type of empirical data we've gathered, and we've produced a book. All these publications are available online at iadb.org. We did one on de-risking, which I was intimately involved with. We did one on Brexit, what it means for the Bahamas and the rest of the Caribbean. The Carib-Canada trade agreement. There's an interesting publication that we did 2 years ago, to devalue or not to devalue. There's another interesting publication we did on, I think when we had struck up the title, it was do not talk to me about debt, talk to me about growth. So I think after hearing Governor Rowell speak, those type of publications which are available online, you will find particularly interesting. So now we get down to the granular nuts and bolts of the Bahamas economy. I'll give you some of the quick empirical indicators that I pay attention to very regularly. In this particular case, I'm giving you some 2015 data, but I'm sure my friend from the IMF will update his data to 2016, as John did. But to a very much extent, some of the data is still applicable. So real growth in the Bahamian economy is about 1.2%, which by all accounts we feel is low but holding. And this is despite the fact that a lot of the Bahamas' growth from our perspective was dedicated to the expected opening of Bahama. The annual inflation in the country end of the year was about 1.5%, which is expected given that this is a huge U.S. importing country and U.S. inflation rates parallels this country. The primary balance to GDP on the fiscal side revenues over expenses, in this case, expenses over revenue as a percentage of GDP, 0.9%. We see it as improving, and normally you would see an improvement if you have a successful VAT program like the Bahamas has had. 3.8% general government balance to GDP. That we see that as improving in 2017 and improving during 2016. The current account balance as a percentage of GDP is a little scary, but given the environment that we're in, with 2 hurricanes, Joaquin in October, 60 to 100 million in damages, and now Matthew this October, 600 million in damages, is not to be unexpected. Government debt to GDP is something that I've paid attention to personally, and that is in 2004 when I was first elected to the IDB board. I think James Smith was Minister of State for Finance, and Ruth Miller was the Financial Secretary. I used to walk into IDB meetings, and even though I represented Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, Guyana, at that time I was chairman of a debt relief committee on Haiti, and we were writing off, I think, $2 billion worth of debt in Honduras. The Bahamas was such an incredible jewel. Our debt to GDP was less than 30%. 5% of that was foreign currency debt. And the sad part for me is I couldn't get James Smith to borrow a lick from the IDB. And this was, in any event, I mean, it was an incredible set of circumstances, and the government still lost the elections. So you know, it's kind of weird to be in this situation now where the circumstances on debt to GDP are doubly even worse, and yet at the same time it's very hard to predict. When you look at, say, the OECS countries, like you take a country like, say, Kitts and Nevis, etc., the IMF is throwing out numbers of manageability like around 60%. And for those of you who, like me, I used to be a banker with Citibank, we know once a client passes debt service of 40%, we don't lend to them, right? Yeah. So in this case, that 65% I think is manageable, but I certainly would like to see it come down. And of course, John spoke to you about our reserves. I hear a lot of noise in the IDB. We pay attention to the noise, but I know our reserves and what they represent should not be a static measurement. And so I'm quite confident in the information John just gave you on reserves. And I don't think I don't think anyone in here will disagree with me when I say the unemployment rate is still too high, correct? All right, okay. So in 2016, for us, here were the type of good stories we saw in the Bahamas. We saw that U.S. tourism demand was steady but increasing. We saw a great fiscal performance on VAT, but there were bad stories. Bahama not opening was a real drag on the news, and 100 stories about crime. The kind of workouts that the government is doing as initiative, national health insurance, we know that stays on your mind. The performance of the electricity sector, despite the fact that we go from BEC to BPL and it's being managed by Power Secure, particularly those of us who had the anecdotal devastating situations during the hurricane. I mean, like me, I didn't have electricity for 19 days. Good news with infrastructure like cellular, cable television. Cable Bahamas launched a new cellular system that will compete with BTC. Competition is always good. Freeport is still under, I guess, extended discussion, renewing certain aspects of the Hospital Creek Agreement. We launched the University of the Bahamas in 2016. I think that's great. I don't know why it took so long. And then, of course, the BAMSI program, which seems to be focused on food security. I think that's a good thing. We know about the hurricanes. I spoke to you about them before. The Bahamas in 2016, to my very personal pride and the pride of the country, we hosted about 5,000 people from the IDB for the annual general meeting. First time like that for us and the Caribbean. During that meeting, Governor Michael Akitas was elected chairman of the board, and his chairmanship goes straight through to when we get to Paraguay next month. And I was in Paraguay last week, and they're still talking about how they want their meeting to be a template of the Bahamas meetings. They can't stop talking about how friendly and kind the Bahamian people were. And I think if it's one thing we should always remember is that comment is a lingering comment that makes us Bahamian, with the IDB, the type of projects we did last year were we did a skills for current and future jobs program that focuses on young people. There's a Family Islands airport infrastructure deal we just did 2 weeks ago that we were supposed to do last year. The airports that will benefit from this infrastructure PBL, policy-based loan, airports in Exuma, airports in Abaco, and North Eleuthera Airport. So you see the diversification away from Nassau for the tourist economy is a good thing. We'll probably do a coastal zone infrastructure management deal, particularly after hurricane damage to a lot of our coastal areas. And then in the private sector, we've done deals with private companies in the Bahamas on rooftop solar, healthcare services expansion, and electrical services expansion. And we had a comprehensive discussion with the Grand Bahamas Port Authority and signed an MOU on Freeport to try to figure out ways to partner with Freeport in reinventing Freeport. I should tell you that on the grant side of the IDB, we've got a grant portfolio with the Bahamas, and that's free money of well over $5 million. And it focuses on areas like public-private partnerships, agribusiness, small business, access to credit. And some of the more granular work that we do that we think will benefit the country is the grant that we did for the National Development Plan. There's a grant for a sustainable plan for Andros. San Salvador is creating a master plan as a touristic opportunity as where the new and the old world collided, turning San Salvador into a historical center, just the same way we would have done in La República in the Dominican Republic, or in Puerto Rico for their port, they being places where Christopher Columbus came, and that would cause South tourism to come up to see these sites. The Sustainable Cities program in Nassau, some of you saw the launch that we did at the IDB annual meeting. That's pretty important because I think we all agree that once we get past the traffic light on Bay Street, past Parliament, going east, and we pass the East Street traffic light or the policeman who's there, Nassau becomes pretty dingy. We have to find a way. And I think the dream is that the private sector will do it with some government sort of setting the environment for some sort of bond that the government guarantees to reinvent the east section of Bay Street. Now, when I look at all that we've done in the economy, and when I look at where you as private sector people want me to tell you there's money to be made, I think that the first thing we should do as Bahamians is look at our strengths and examine what we have. No matter what you think, we still lead in tourism. So you'll find that my laundry list of opportunities concern us getting more bang for the buck out of the tourism product. And then I talk about financial services, which is under heavy threat, but we still lead there. And then I talk about what I think areas of the economy that amount to diversification, making the economy competitive, and also making the economy an opportunity for export and trade. So I have a set of prescriptive notes here in these slides under threats and opportunities. And I start off by saying most of our economic problems are self-inflicted. That means that we can solve them. And the real prevailing prescription on this is we need to better prioritize and plan. Some of our threats are systemic and cultural, but I'm also optimistic that education, retraining, and tools can fix these problems. Technology tools and the application of technology are pretty critical to what we're doing at the IDB and where we think the Bahamas should be heading. I think if we spend less time on Facebook, WhatsApp, destroying each other, and more time on Facebook, WhatsApp, building up each other, and discussing ideas and opportunities, we could be a more productive country. I've said that my high school Facebook group, my Jamaican WhatsApp group, etc., it's always just bad news. Nobody comes to me with a good deal. And I think we could use that technology for something better. With the tourist product, if we diversify and we downstream and we focus on niche tourism, like healthcare tourism, maritime tourism, sports, and education tourism, I think there's an incredible opportunity. It's my hope, even as a track and field coach, that whoever is the next administration sets a goal that within the next 5 years, the Bahamas will reclaim its gold title in the Olympics in sailing. We shouldn't be doing so well in track and field, and we're not doing well in sailing and in swimming. This is a seafaring nation. Now, either we got to go to Ragged Island and recruit some boys, we got to do some, but I firmly believe that when the old Sea Dogs, Sir Durwood, got that medal in snipe sailing, that put the Bahamas on the map as an Olympic contender, and we never sought to repeat that. We need to do that. The SMEs in the country require a high level of technical assistance and financial resources for their access. The energy infrastructure is desperately in need of upgrading. I think we ought to embrace renewable and energy efficient technology. And I've been to many seminars with you all on how we could do that. It's just taking a bit too slow for us to move. The IDB has money out there for it. And like I say, you can always go to our website and you can always call me and I'll direct you on how to get some of that money. When I get back home, I am going to focus on mentoring young people, and in particular, I've been working with an MIT professor who has Barbados's highest award because he developed all the technology that makes you, when you touch your cell phones, makes it interpret your finger and move the glass. He's Barbadian, and we are working on developing a Caribbean STEM program for our top high school students. It requires dedicated focus on quadratic equations and trigonometry. And we need to make sure all of these kids get at least a 1400 in their SATs, and we'll guarantee them full admission into MIT. So when I leave this position, that's going to be my focus, mentoring. And I want to encourage you in the private sector, because change starts with you, to do the same thing. Those of you who are big timers and you own your own company and you have really good managers, pay them to teach for free at College of the Bahamas, or pay them to sponsor a junior achievement company. Take time out to give back, because if we don't help this next generation and show them that they're more good guys who want to do things than bad guys, we would have lost the battle from the very beginning. I won't say any more about crime, but we have 3 extensive publications on crime in the Bahamas. you can access. And the last point I want to make is whenever I'm home, I do my very best to say to everybody from the counter at Bahamas Air straight to the hotel counter, whether they're doing a good job or bad job, I try to encourage them. I think the Chamber of Commerce should engage in an initiative this year that focuses on rewarding and showcasing excellence. It's too much bad news. And the kids are beginning to feel that the bad news is true. And we all know about alternative facts, right? That's the environment I work in Washington. Let's not create an alternative fact here. That's not in fact true. There's more good news than bad news in this economy. I want to end with Joey Toy is the executive director of MIT's School of Engineering, and he always makes this statement. He says, education is what they do to you, but learning is what you do to yourself. Let's inculcate a culture in the private sector that flows into the public sector of continuous learning. And I end with my personal vision. I'll be back in less than, I'll be back in less than 2 years. And this is the vision of the kind of Bahamas I want to build. He was scrolling up so well, Edison. I don't see it there. Oh, yeah, bring it up. That's every day if I'm in Washington, if I'm in Argentina, if I'm in Brazil, and I think about my country and I write on my country and I try to figure out where I want it to be and where I envision is the gift I want to give to our children as a future Bahamas. These are my words. Notice the second to the last word, aquatic environment. The forgotten opportunity in the Bahamas lies in the blue economy, the ocean. And we're just not, it's inconceivable. High schools in the Bahamas don't have swimming pools. And every day, there is no high school in the Bahamas that has a course in fishing. John, even and Andres, the ones that your parents just expect you to go learn how to fish yourself. By now, we should have had 1 million Jacques Cousteaus selling pictures of what's in our ocean and making money. So, I am really indebted to you for your kind attention, and I thank you for coming out to listen to me and the other members of this panel. And if I have to cut and run, please just email me and I'll be happy to respond and talk to you about the ideas I've encountered for some of the other economies that we're responsible for managing. So, gracias, merci, thank you very much.